Are you familiar with the NPC meme? I hope you are, because I'm not gonna bother to explain it. Just Google if you don't know, boomer. This video is already way too long as it is. Before I start giving you any thoughts of my own, I'm going to read a bit from a predominantly right-winged forum. I suggest you grab something to hold on to, because what you are about to hear is quite a disturbing look into the mind of a right-wing reactionary. There's also a really big run-on sentence that will likely induce severe cringe. It's not the whole post that I'm gonna read, it's just a portion that doesn't really need context to be understood. So here we go. There are those, probably not far from a plurality of the population, who do not think in words at all. There are quite a few more who think in words only a minority of the time. What does that say about these people? It would make sense to say that these people have an impaired sense of awareness and an inferior ability to grasp abstract concepts. It's also quite likely that these people are less able to engage in meaningful self-reflection. I can think of certain characteristics of people who would not think in words or have a meaningful inner monologue. I assume these people would be more likely to be extroverted. Lacking an inner monologue makes solitude far more boring. They would act in a very conventional manner, doing the right thing because it's the right thing due to an impaired ability to engage in introspective thought. And they would be focused on material wealth/pleasure more so than abstract concepts, because lacking an inner monologue impairs their ability to suppress the desires of their reptilian brain. These people are essentially running on autopilot, and they form a significant portion of the population. The guy who goes out of his way to enforce rules purely because they exist, the dude whose behavior is a mix of conforming and doing what feels good, young adult in fashionable clothing, who cares about smoking weed and fucking. Not much else. Mostly reptilian mentally. The guy who acts like his water cooler tier conversations are worth anything more than small talk. And the guy who thinks he's hot shit despite being extremely low status. Usually ugly/fat/short/other undesirable characteristic. And therefore misses out on the halo effect. Low status, but too psychologically inept to figure out why. And acts like hot shit because it's what everyone else is doing. All seem to me like good examples of this type. Now, here is the run-on sentence I mentioned. It consists of 121 words. Personally, I think around 40 words in a sentence is where you need to get anxious and consider restructuring your paragraph. Unless, of course, you purposely want to annoy your reader. Well, this guy seems to have no rhetorical standards whatsoever. But let's continue reading. There's nothing inherently wrong with them. Lacking an inner monologue is the norm for mammalian consciousness. But what level are these people operating on? They are basically NPCs, one step above being mentally subhuman, if not already there. So, everything they say and do is what has been conditioned into them, or what their reptilian brain tells them to do. They do the right thing, they hold the right opinions, they dress the right way, and they're looking for Mr. or Mrs. Right to settle down with, have kids, consume, and then die. Having a discussion with them on anything beyond surface level shit will get you nothing but a fluoride stare, a response that seems programmed into them, like when you accidentally talk to a video game character twice. And if they're the dominant aggressive type, they'll just ridicule you. Their fields of interest include their jobs, the weather, the right thing to do, food, drugs, shitty mass-produced media, and what everyone else is doing. Like everyone else, they are participants in a race to survive and pass on their genes, but they are operating on autopilot and much more direct about it. These people, the ones who have no inner voices, are NPCs, plain and simple. Do you have an inner monologue? I absolutely do. I have a lot of fun toying around with it. When I'm alone, I don't really feel like I'm totally alone. Often people will say that I've been quiet, and it surprises me, because my inner monologue has been chattering the whole time. My dad is also like this, but not my mother. So perhaps genetics as well as upbringing plays a role in having an inner monologue. Genetics plays a role in other psychological traits, so it's not an unreasonable assertion. And now we arrive at the last paragraph, and here's where it gets proper scary. Should these people be treated as automatons, or should they be afforded the same level of human decency as people with an inner monologue? Is there a way of figuring out whether somebody has an inner monologue or not? Should we work to instill an inner monologue in children from a young age so that everybody who is capable of having an inner monologue gets one? Should people who do not have an inner monologue and are psychologically/neurologically incapable of having one be able to vote? Do certain groups lack an inner monologue more than others? These are all questions that needs to be asked. That typo that you see here is not mine, it's his actually. It seems to be that even Übermensch can make a mistake sometimes. So the first thought I want to share with you is this. If you search the internet to hear what the right really thinks, you will find way more posts like this. This is merely an example. So the whole NPC thing is not always just shits and giggles. The NPC meme is not always just a meme. Of course it can be. There are also memers out there who really just mean it as a joke. They do not truly think that you are a kind of philosophical zombie when you, as this person puts it, do the right thing. They may think of leftists and some other people they disagree with as less intelligent than them, sure. But they, and that is hopefully the majority of these assholes, do not actually believe that we as leftists are NPCs. They don't actually take it too seriously. But the bitter truth is that there are some who do. There are some who think an Übermensch, a subhuman human being, is something that can exist. And by the way, this is a real post by a real human being. I did not make this up to make Nazis look bad. I'll put a link in the description so you can see for yourself that I am not lying. I personally do not have this inner voice. So perhaps the Übermensch is correlating a lack of inner speech with traditionally perceived NPCdom. Because I, politically speaking, am an NPC all the way, a leftist. A social justice advocate. From my position, Marxist to the right. I'm a person who thinks that we as society should do the right thing purely because it's the right thing. Fairly, even when it's to the detriment of our society. But let's put a pin in this for a moment and take a look at something else. Right now on your screen is something that has been popping up all over the internet. Take a look. In case you are wondering, I'm a 4. I don't have no visual capacity, like I have no inner voice, but my ability to visualize things is very conceptual, very basic, very limited and not at all lifelike. Maybe sometimes on a good day where I have consumed a lot of sugar or I've slept very well, I may be a 3, just sometimes, but I tend to be a 4. I've been reading the threads below these kinds of posts. Obviously, these are not right-wing forums, so I haven't been finding anything too absurd that I can show you and shock you with. But I have found that people who identify as a 1 often seem to think that people who identify as anything lower than a 1 lack in imagination. Obviously, this is a bit bigoted, but not outrage-worthy. They're just ignorant statements. Because even if you aren't capable of visualizing something, obviously you can still conceptualize it. It is completely possible to think of an apple, even a specific apple, or a fictional apple, and not see it as though it is in front of you. In fact, I'd say that most of the time it's a lot more practical to merely conceptualize rather than visualize. My personal opinion, of course. If you are a 1, you may disagree, but I'm speaking as a 4. Because when I just merely conceptualize an apple rather than visualize it, it is neither big nor small, it is neither red nor green, it's just an apple. No details have been filled in. Of course, in this exercise, the very goal is to visualize. So when you merely conceptualize, you are failing the exercise, obviously. I get that. But in any real world application, conceptualizing seems to me to be practically always better than visualizing. When somebody tells you a story and you visualize it, you will inevitably have to fill in some of the gaps. If an apple appears in a story and they do not mention what color it is, you will have to give the apple a color. Maybe it's green, maybe it's red, maybe it's pink. Though that would be gay, obviously. You have to make a decision about the apple's color if you want to visualize it. As a rather indecisive person, I think I tend not to visualize things for this reason. Because I'd have to make a lot of choices and I just can't. Perhaps if you are good at making random decisions, this is no problem for you. Or at least it's barely an inconvenience. So let me give you a better, though less fascinating example how visualizing things can be disadvantageous. But first, let me ask you, do you know how multiple eyewitness accounts almost always contradict? If your answer is no, I suppose you look up online how true that is, because that would be very beneficial for your understanding of what I'm about to say. Say it is you who have to tell a story, and not just any story. You have just witnessed a horrible accident. A man has fallen into the river, and neither the police or the newspaper or the local vigilante is asking you what you saw. But it all happened so fast, and really your mind was elsewhere until you heard the splash. One moment that man was just walking in front of you on his feet on the sidewalk, and the next moment he was with his hands in the air drowning in the river. But they want to know what you saw, because they suspect you was pushed. So you try to remember what it was that you saw. What do you think happens next? You see my problem? There sure is nothing wrong with assigning a fictitious apple a random color. But who is to say that when recollecting an event you won't do the same for details your mind has not processed? Maybe by complete accident you will have been making up a detail when you try to visualize the scene in your head. Obviously this is just a theory, just a hypothesis. I don't mean to make a truth claim about how the world works, but I think this theory of mine is not too far out there. I feel like this would be a good explanation for why eyewitness accounts tend to differ so much. I do think it is very cool though when people are a 1 on the newly discovered Apple scale. I would also love to be able to visualize things so vividly. But besides being extremely cool, I don't actually think a mind's eye is as useful as people who have it would maybe make it out to be. And now, back to the Übermensch. Oh no, not quite yet. Before I get back to talking about the inner monologue thing, I want to say something about language. I know it takes a bit long for me to get to the point, it's hardly appropriate. I suggest watching this video, or any other video for that matter, on 2x speed. That would save you a lot of time. But I hope all of this apparent padding will make sense in a moment. I want to give you an example of how language can fail. It's a little anecdote that took place on my first job. I've had 2 more jobs since, but this was the only one that I've had that was actually ethical. So it was technically the best job I've ever had. Too bad it only lasted for 3 weeks. And I was talking to a colleague there, and my colleague told me a story about a good friend of his, and his friend did something horrible. If I remember correctly, after excessive alcohol consumption, he got massively intoxicated and sexually harassed a woman. And his colleague then said something akin to, "Yeah, that's just how he is, that happens all the time." And I said, "Wow, that's really bad, he should really repent." But here's the thing, that's not what I said. It's what I meant to say, and while I was speaking the words that I was saying, I thought that was what I was saying, but I was not. What I said was this: wow, that's really bad. He should really convert to Christianity. And my colleague said, oh, but he is a Christian. Which, of course, I had assumed already. Because only if he was a Calvinist could he justify such toxic masculinity. But how did that happen, you may ask? How did you say a thing that you didn't mean to say? Well, that conversation did not happen in English. That's why it was happening in Dutch. And the Dutch language, due to the fact that it has historically been used almost exclusively by Calvinists, lacks a concept of repentance. Due to this problem, Dutch Bible translations use instead of repent the very same word you'd use when you would say convert to Christianity, which for some reason can be said with only one word in the Dutch language, bekeren. When you would say convert to Islam, for example, you would say bekeren tot de islam. But when you want to say in Dutch convert to Christianity, you only need to say bekeren, because Christianity is generally thought of as the default religion. So when you do not specify what religion you speak of, it is thought that you must be speaking of Christianity. So that is how it came to be that I said he should really convert to Christianity, while I was trying to say he should repent. Very frustrating stuff. The reason I tell you this story is because I want you to realize just how limited language is. Not everything that can be said in one language can be properly expressed in another language. And this means that if you think exclusively in words and never in abstract concepts, then there are thoughts you cannot have. This is why praying in tongues is a thing that serves the purpose of allowing people who ordinarily do all their thinking in words to speak their mind without the limitations of language. I believe there's a novel, 1984. I've never read it because I'm not on that kind of level of intelligence. But in 1984, there's a totalitarian government who invented a new language, Newspeak. It's a simplified version of English, and the purpose is to stop people from forming complex thoughts. But guess what, big brother? I don't need a single word to form a thought. I'm an NPC. I can think without having a pompous supervillain monologuing in my head. The Übermensch thinks he's so much better than us and so much more capable of having complex thoughts. We shouldn't be able to vote, and he says that that's because he thinks we are barely conscious. But the truth most likely is that he is simply afraid of what it could mean for a thought to be expressed in anything other than words. He doesn't want to deal with the fact that there are some people like him who build with Legos, and some people who build with clay. Maybe building with clay is a bit gross and uncultured, and maybe it's a little imprecise. But you sure have a lot more freedom building with clay, and I love to have that freedom in my mind. Neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is the key word here. Everybody's mind functions slightly differently. There's a question almost everyone wonders about at some point in their life, and that's this. Is the way I perceive the color red, for example, the same as your red? Or could it be that your red is my green? But what if the way we perceive the world and the way we perceive our own minds differs from person to person even more, way more than that? What if the way I experience a thought is not even remotely similar to the way you experience a thought? I see how that idea can be frightening to somebody who thinks there's such a thing as a neurotypical human. It destroys a lot of comfortable ideas, like the idea that there's a most efficient way of studying, for example. It also destroys the idea that when a person fails to understand something you express, it's because there's something wrong with their intelligence. Oh, and we all love believing other people are stupider than us, don't we? Yeah, but what I say here is true. Society and how people interact on a social level should really change here and there. And it obviously is at least somewhat true that neurotypicals don't exist. As the Apple visualization exercise already proves, that there's a huge division in how people have thoughts. Add to that the idea that not everyone has an inner monologue, and the idea of a neurotypical human has kind of been utterly destroyed actually, especially if my red is not your red. But what if I told you that there are a lot of humans who are, by complete accident, much like the Übermensch, the Nazi of whom we have been reading this forum post. And I am first and foremost referring to the people who work in the education system. The public education system bases all its theories on the idea that there's such a thing as a neurotypical being. The reason this makes them like the Nazi is because what they do in essence is completely disregard people whose brains work differently than theirs does. They hold this bizarre imagining that for a brain, a different way of being a brain is always a compromised state of being a brain. In other, more simpler words, they think, just like the Nazi, that some groups of people are just stupid. But they got it all wrong, completely and committedly wrong. Public education is, quite frankly, catering to only a minority of the population. I genuinely believe that a lot of human beings who are barely capable of passing high school could actually be stable geniuses without knowing. They're just only so unfortunate as not to be the type of human that is catered to by the education system. And you personally might be like the Nazi, consider it. This might feel like a bit of a plot twist, but honestly, making a video about how Nazis are bad, that's barely useful. There's already way too many breadtubers as it is, and they're all exact duplicates of each other. I made this video to question not the Nazis, but all of us, as humans. Aren't a lot of us way too quick to label someone else as stupid or even a little bit inferior? Like, for example, if you register as a 1 on the Apple scale, you may be hiding behind pseudoscientific words like aphantasia to express that people who are a 5 are lesser beings in some regard. And the reason I say that aphantasia is pseudoscientific is because there is no evidence that people who can't form mental images actually don't have an imagination. It's just a ridiculous, baseless assumption. In fact, I've been reading tweets of actual artists. I've been reading tweets of actual artists who say they were a 5. But you may ask why I am assuming that people who are 1 on the Apple scale might sometimes look down on people who are a 5. Well, I have to be very honest with you. I know that I personally would judge a lot of people and feel superior to people who cannot do things that I can do. If only it wasn't for the fact that I'm a barely functional human. I'm a mess, and that's why I would barely even be capable of feeling superior to anyone. But people who do not identify as a mess, functional human beings like my colleagues, my fellow legal criminals, I can sometimes hear them gossip and talk about people they deem inferior for lacking certain qualities, be it social skills or cognitive skills. So I know from first-hand experience how Nazi the common person can be. There's a common expression, you don't know my story, and that's obviously always a good thing to remember. But we need to one-up that. You don't know my mind. People are not necessarily stupid for not understanding something, and people do not necessarily mean to be rude when they fail to conform to social norms. You just don't know. Obviously, when a person would actually be stupid or rude, you should still not judge them and treat them with respect. That should go without saying. But I can see how it could be hard for some people to not feel superior to people who lack an ability that they have. So I thought I needed to tell you that not only should you not judge, as you probably heard a million times, you are actually, in fact, totally incapable of judging. With infinite diversity and infinite combinations, there is no way to determine what type of brain is superior.